So we're working in this emerging sector.
How do you derive the economic value from your innovation?
It's free as in freedom.
This was our opportunity to break the mold and to try something different.
The source is available. It's open.
It's a shift in your mindset from a scarcity mindset, like I must protect what is mine, to more of an abundance mindset.
What sustains this kind of innovation? Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Who's having a little fun this morning on the main stage? Unbelievable. Unbelievable group of folks coming on. Today, if you've checked your schedule, the title of what we are talking about today is this idea that no innovation is an island. No innovation is an island. And we have some really fantastic folks assembled here who we're going to talk about it from various perspectives, the convergence of perspectives. So let's say we dive right in. I'd love to hear who you are, and we'll send the conversation from there.
My name is Scott. I am an engineer. I'm an electrical engineer, electronics. I work on the BitAxe project quite a bit, but I'm also deeply interested in open source Bitcoin mining, bringing it back to open source, both from the software, firmware, hardware level. Doing a lot of work with the 256 Foundation right now to sort of develop that space further and advocate and promote for open source Bitcoin mining.
I'm Cuddy. I am running Bitcoin strategy at Choya, and that includes running the Choya Innovation Lab, the workforce development efforts in Texas, and also just orange pilling, hyper-Bitcoinization through ERCOT, regulatory and policymakers, and then businesses.
Give us the 10-second intro for those who are not familiar. What is Choya?
Choya is a 3-generation oil and gas company that's built their roots as wildcatters in Texas. And from there, they've gotten into Bitcoin mining, saw the convergence of energy, flexible compute, and flexible or like intermittent generation in West Texas. Built one of the first spec-built substations, 150 megawatts, back in 2018, which that's an incredibly large-sized data center back then. And from there, just have been keeping our finger on the pulse and like being involved and being the change that we want to see.
And as Brad pointed out, I'm D, all of the above. Bit of tech. I'm Philip from Gridless in Kenya, if you can't tell by looking at me. Yeah, so, you know, everything from the technology side, the software side, the energy side, the strategy side.
So we're working in this emerging sector. And a lot of folks, you think about tech, they hear the word open source or closed source, but they don't necessarily know what that entails. And I'd like to get into the conversation of how we develop in an open source community and how that's shared potentially with closed source operators. But I'd love to first hear, any one of you, if you could tell me a little bit about what is the distinction between something when we say it's open source versus when it's closed source? What does that say about its creation?
Well, open source, I mean, it quite literally means that the source is available. It's open. There's a bunch of different open source licenses, but generally the idea is that you could get the sort of raw materials to build something, the plans, the source, the code to build something and compile it yourself. But you have the freedom to inspect, modify, distribute, fully understand how it works. Quite a bit different than how a lot of proprietary software, hardware is distributed, where you don't have that ability, that freedom to understand how it works, how to change it. But more importantly is the ability to then distribute it. Like if you want to change something in open source, is you are expressly given the permission to change it and distribute it as a new thing or a corrected thing or just how you want to see it happen. It's you know, we talk about it like it's free as in freedom. It doesn't necessarily have to be free as in beer. One of the things that some people think is, you know, it's open source, that just means you're giving it away and there's no way to make any money, to profit off it. And that's not really the case at all. In fact, it's sort of designed to increase collaboration and increase developer effort on it that can actually like increase profitability or revenue.
What do you
And
have,
I actually
Philip?
think that's a good angle, which is like, how do you derive the economic value from your innovation? Is it because you and others use that innovation freely to create new things, to create new economic value? Or is it simply that you have the secrecy and the control over this thing, and therefore it's the exclusivity that you enjoy that gives you the economic value? And so I think one of the challenges, as 30-year tech entrepreneur, is that you always think, wow, I've come up with this innovation, I need to hold it tight because the only economic value I get is being the only person that has this, as opposed to open source where it's like, no, I'm going to innovate this great thing, but then I'm going to make it available for other people, and collectively we're going to have to figure out how do we make economic value from it.
I feel like it's a shift in your mindset from a scarcity mindset, like I must protect what is mine, to more of an abundance mindset. Like, and you're starting to think that, and we were talking about this earlier, that the rising tide, we're all Bitcoiners through and through. Everything that we contribute towards the proliferation of Bitcoin through our each individual gifts, Scott on the hardware, Phil on the energy, me in energy in Texas, like we're all working towards the betterment of what we want to see in the world. By opening it up and inviting the collaboration, it just taps into the collective human consciousness.
Now, what I'm hearing from y'all is that you have to have this kind of precondition of a community that values the big pie idea, that there's kind of enough to go around for everybody. Is that the kind of correct interpretation when we think about how open source is contributing to various industries? Is it just the case that because we work in energy technology, Bitcoin mining, this very new industry, is that why the open source is here? Would it be different in another industry?
I think the benefit is that it's a new industry and you get to reinvent yourself now. So we all came from different industries where we were put into that box. And this was our opportunity to break the mold and to try something different. And I think that's what attracts so many high agency, freedom focused people to the underlying open source software that is Bitcoin.
But I mean, I think we've seen it historically in other industries as well. I mean, if we look at the internet, look at the influence and proliferation of Linux, as an open source operating system. I mean, what runs the majority of servers that make the internet function? It's an open source operating system.
I thought it was Jeff Bezos.
That's true too. But so it's and I think what it brings, and we see this in the Bitcoin network and core itself, which is the fact that it's open source means you know how it works, you know where the issues are potentially, and you allow a level of collaboration because anybody can be a participant in trying to advance that technology, as opposed to having a walled off thing that only you control. And if you make the right decisions, maybe more people buy it. And if you make the wrong decisions, people abandon it. So I think there's precedent throughout the history of technology that open source does drive a level of proliferation and collaboration that closed source just doesn't allow.
Thinking of collaboration and community, and I love that you're perking up, Scott. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're facilitating a community, an open source community, and what does that mean? Does that mean you all go to the coffee shop and you look over schematics together? Does it mean that you just hop on a Zoom call and you're talking about things? What does it mean to facilitate a community? First, introduce us to your community, and then tell us a little bit about how they work. Is it permissioned? Is it not permissioned? Do I pay an access fee? Does somebody just show up and review stuff? Take us away.
Well, we have a community called the Open Source Miners United surrounding the BitAxe and other related projects. And it is like Bitcoin development itself, it's just sort of a meritocracy, right? You show up, and if you have ideas, you can publish them. And so we publish our designs, our ideas, like examples, just on the internet. GitHub is a popular one, but there's lots of ways you can publish these. They're all digital design files. We tend to use freely available design tools. I think that is like it's fundamental. Like, open source is fundamental to the decentralization of Bitcoin itself. The development model means we don't have kind of a top-down dictation of the way these rules of the network are implemented. There's lots of different people who can do it and audit it and understand how it works and contribute it to it. And sort of the best ideas that are the most resilient towards outside influence form that consensus. And that is the development process too, as in addition to the way the network works.
But I think on the other side, like we're looking at trying to do some innovation on the ground in Africa, and the fact that I know that Skot is open source, like I'm not trying to compete with him. We're actually trying to solve, a bigger problem together. And so, we can pick up the phone and call Skot and say, hey, we're struggling with this. Can you help us? And it's part of his motivation to actually want to help us to maybe go in a slightly different direction, find new applications for the technology we have. Yeah. And so I think that is a critical part of the open source ethos, is this willingness to say, I have some ideas, you have some ideas, let's put those ideas together and see if we can come up with something better than either of us on our own.
Philip, can you make that more concrete for us? Because what you're talking about is a really interesting crossover between this kind of meritocratic community, these folks that are kind of getting in where they're fitting in to contribute, and you're helping run Gridless. And Gridless is not a nonprofit, it's not an NGO, it's a business. So what is that relationship like? And what specifically, is there an innovation in particular that you've had some really interesting insight on that you can tell us about?
Well, as a matter of fact, Rob, yes, there is. So one of the things we've been working on, we saw this challenge, and it specifically started with small farmers in Zambia, but we have the same challenge in Kenya as well, which is often they'll buy a number of solar panels to run a water pump, right? So they need to pump water during the day up to a tank so they can irrigate their crops. But most of the energy coming off of that solar is completely worthless. And so kind of brainstorming with our friends at Block, we came up with this idea called the blue collar miner. And so it essentially has the look and feel of a traditional battery storage system that you would use on a solar setup, but it reuses old hash boards. And so it's a project that they funded us to develop. It will be completely open source, but a lot of the things that ultimately go into making that function are things that if Skot had not done the hard work before us, we wouldn't be able to achieve. And so, for us, it's how do we help a small farmer get more economic value out of this energy generation that they've invested in? And also, how do we further decentralize, the mining network? And so I think that's really a good example of, and from our standpoint, like, I'm not going to make money off selling a bunch of these devices. What I really want to do is drive the advancement of energy access on the continent, the decentralization of the Bitcoin network. And so this is a way that we can take our skill set, we can partner with our friends, and their skill set, and ultimately, I think, have potentially a huge impact on our community there in Africa.
Yeah, and functionally, just to map this, because there's got to be at least 3 or 4 people who are looking at us like, hashboard, what is he talking? Solar? For those of us who are not all the way down the Bitcoin mining rabbit hole, ostensibly what you're describing is the resolution of an e-waste problem that you are combining with a wasted energy problem.
100%.
So if you install a big solar array, anytime it's not being used, that's a bit like a dead asset. That's a bit like a hotel that has empty rooms. And so what you're saying is that the hashboard, and hashboards are normally the most expensive replacement part in a machine. You depreciate them, and then once they're worth 0, you've typically already wanted to purchase the more efficient model. These are now being sent to locations where on somebody else's books they have a worth of 0, but they can still generate Bitcoin. They can still produce hashes. So what you're describing is this combination.
100%, because at that point the cost of energy is 0. Like you've made the capital investment. The sun is going to shine whether you use it or not. So all of that energy has a 0 cost to it. And so yes, is an older hash board going to produce as much revenue as a new one? Absolutely not. But the revenue it produces is greater than 0.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that makes a difference.
And it makes a huge difference. And so, yeah, I don't necessarily frame it in the e-waste, but you're 100% correct that it's like all of this technology that was useful 5 years ago, in a Western context, how do we repurpose that to still extract economic value for somebody in emerging markets? And yeah, this is one way of doing it.
What do you think of, Brad?
And from the Western context. We're actually working on some direct DC mining off-grid operations now, just because
What does that mean, direct DC?
it would mean so the grid that we're operating under right now, where you flip the light switch on, it's alternating current. They're traditionally generators spinning magnets, creating electric field, electricity, alternating current is the current structure. That's Edison. DC is direct current. That is what solar panels produce as their natural output, and then you must invert that to alternating current in order for that power to be inputted into our grid system. So direct current itself doesn't really have a lot of commercial applications because everything is alternating current.
It all runs on AC. I have to
Correct.
convert it to AC to make it useful.
But we're trying to reimagine because solar panels are becoming a consumer electronic and they're going down and down the price curve, batteries are becoming more robust. Imagining how could we reimagine a grid of direct current only, and then reimagine the tools that you put onto it. And Bitcoin mining is, because of this open source collaboration, it wants to consume these electrons, and it's got speed to market, so we can start monetizing and then build the systems later.
Well, and Brad left out the most important part, which is a typical Bitcoin miner takes AC as input and then very inefficiently converts that to DC to run the hash board. So if we can eliminate that step, then we get more economic value out of that energy than producing heat in our power supply if we just go direct to DC.
So the work, it would not be too much to say that the work that's happening in something like the Open Source Miners Union is actually today impacting not only domestic innovation in Texas, but this product development that's happening over in Africa.
That is not a stretch.
That's exactly what I want to see. And one of the cool things about it is that all this stuff is out there in the open and it's published. While I love talking with you and scheming about these projects, like, you don't even have to do that. You don't have to join Open Source Miners United. The sort of people out in the field who have ideas and ideas for applications and tinkerers in their garage and everyone working on this can just do it. And they don't have to start from zero, right? They can base it on top of projects that have been already produced, and they can just run with it and iterate fast and just try stuff. And so it kind of lowers the bar towards these really awesome, really cool, unique applications all around the world that are going to do great things for the Bitcoin network too, with decentralization.
So this all sounds like unicorns and puppies.
It is.
I love it. But I do want to ask the question because there is a certain thing happening on the stage, right? Scott knows Brad knows Philip knows Scott. There's a sort of mutual cultural trust that's happening. So if Philip shows up and decides to scrape the archives of the Open Source Miners Union, send them all overseas somewhere and start manufacturing things and start just, kind of getting the leg up on starting his own personal mining empire, he could. It's all out there. But obviously that's not happening here, so there's something else going on. So I'm curious, what sustains this kind of innovation, one? And then two, what are the risks to it? Because it seems to me like it is a real risk. If you're going to put the plans out there, people are going to behave, but some are not going to behave. How do we police that? How do we monitor that? How do we keep an eye on it? Or do we not? Is it something we don't have to worry about?
Well, I actually think I'd flip that around. Like, the hardest thing to do to keep something protected is to keep it private. The easiest thing to do is to release it to the world. Then there is no advantage to that secret knowledge. And so I think that Scott and I were talking about this earlier today. I mean, the ultimate value of what he's done with BitAxe is to create, this set of design files that anybody can take and produce. And yes, I'm building BitAxes in Nairobi, Kenya, right? Because I have
what is a BitAxe?
A BitAxe, Scott, I would be the wrong person to answer that question.
Fundamentally, it's an open source Bitcoin miner. It uses ASIC chips, which is what all the latest and greatest miners do. It's the first ever open source ASIC miner, the first open source miner in general in the last decade, which is kind of ridiculous. It's open source, so you can build it. It's also just one chip. A normal miner will have like 200, so it's low power, it's quiet, it's much more practical to run in your house. And it's it's also open, so a lot of different manufacturers can and do make them and make them available for sale. So it's a nice intro to mining, to learn about it, to get started, but it also kind of demonstrates a lot of work that went into reverse engineering how this works. Because unlike other electronics, the Bitcoin mining ASIC industry, they do not yet, at least, release any data sheets, designs, plans for how to use these chips.
Nothing.
It's like an adversarial relationship. Like a lot of the manufacturers of BitAxes are unsoldering, buying brand new AM miners and unsoldering the chips because they won't sell them directly to us. So, yeah, it's a sort of a demonstration of what myself and the community have learned reverse engineering this stuff.
It can't be stopped. Philip, what were you going to finish on that?
No,
thought?
I mean, so I think that's exactly it. Is like, so it's expensive for me to buy BitAxes manufactured, let's say here in the U.S. and ship them to Kenya and pay import duty on them when I have the capacity to manufacture them locally. And so, I have a cheaper cost of production, and I was able to change the screen printing stencil so it doesn't say BitAxe, it says BitShoka, which is Swahili for BitAxe, and we put a little Africa logo on it. It is cool. But I can manufacture those cheaper locally and still be able to sell them at a comparable price into the market. So I'm not earning a lot of revenue, but we can earn some income off of being able to take advantage of that. And, if I had to license that from Scott, if, he kept parts of it secret, simply like we couldn't do that. And so I think that's one of the beauties of open source is you can kind of align the technical design with the optimal manufacturing location to ultimately reach a new market that guys here are not really going to be able to reach.
Well, it's so interesting because we made a little transition that I hope everybody caught, which is that we started talking about open source in the context of the business environment, building tools for a business that wants to be profitable and is getting this really, really brilliant design backing. And we've moved now into something which is really interesting around the BitAxe. The BitAxe is not something that you buy if you want to make $1 million. It's something that you buy because you want to learn a little bit of something. You want to learn how this Bitcoin thing works. And a fantastic way to do that is with mining. And a fantastic way to help decentralize the network, to run your own node, to participate in the network, is to have this little BitAxe. We're talking about something in the consumer side and the community side. Can you tell us a little bit about what these kind of downstream effects of this open source creation are, just broadly community-wise?
What I originally wanted to make the BitAxe just to satisfy a curiosity of my own, but when I started thinking about publishing this and getting it out there, it was like, well, is anyone going to want to do this, right? Because you don't make money with BitAxes. Is anyone going to want to do this? Maybe it's just some nerds who are interested in this stuff. But the project has been incredibly successful. There's over 100,000 devices out there. We don't know for sure because all sorts of people make them, but it kind of really taps into this idea of like Bitcoiners and people who are interested in Bitcoin. They want to be a part of the network. They want to understand how this works. And the industrial miners are, thousands of watts and not very practical to run in your home.
And it's
So
very intimidating. You read about, somebody setting up a 500 megawatt site and you see 900 foot long buildings and you go, maybe that's not for me.
Yes.
But it is for you.
But, like there's a lot of people who are very interested in doing this. And, I'm sure a non-zero number of them will go into football field sized buildings with all the machines into it because, well, it's really cool. It's addicting. But, it's that gateway drug towards being a real part of the Bitcoin network.
And there is hope that you might hit a block.
Yes. Yeah, there's also a lottery aspect to it.
What's your take on that, Brad?
Yeah, I think, like Scott said, there was no open source Bitcoin mining machine. You had no ability to even tap into that open collective. And so on the retail side, which is what BitAxe is, like not profitable unless you hit the lottery block. But it's setting an example of where we want things to go. And it's showing the power of the community, the collaboration, and putting pressure on these larger scale infrastructure providers, which arguably Bitcoin mining is probably the most closed source of the open source community of Bitcoin. And so I think, like what Scott did by starting It's like it's the first domino to fall, but Block and Proto have since started open sourcing some of their development material, and I just hope it's a change that we see in the future.
Yeah, one fascinating thing about mining as an industry, and I felt this when I was even beginning to learn about Bitcoin in 2017, that the first thing everybody tells you when you say, oh, I'm interested in mining, they say, go away. No, you're not. You'll never make money.
Don't do it.
And the industry has not really changed that much in terms of a relationship standpoint. The technology has gotten better. The sites have exploded. They've become far more numerous and far larger. But the relationship between the producers and the producers, there's really two major producers of the machines that folks are buying when they're mining Bitcoin. That relationship has always remained kind of adversarial. And it's a little bizarre to have an adversarial relationship with your main provider when you have a multi-billion-dollar industry and $100 million deals crossing borders. So what's so fascinating to me is that open source, specifically what's happening here, we can track the growth of it directly into operational businesses. And it seems to me that this is really going to be the way that the industry maybe becomes more US-centric, maybe it changes in terms of who holds the power, things open up. What kind of closing thoughts do you have as we tie these ideas together?
I mean, I think open source is going to provide benefits to the entire mining industry, from the smallest to the largest. Absolutely, it's ridiculous that you have these like billion-dollar companies that earn all of their revenue, 100% of their revenue, from these machines running closed-source firmware that they don't control, and it's mostly controlled by a sketchy Chinese company.
Well, and again, we were talking about this earlier today. I mean, a lot of the things that we're doing at Gridless are kind of pushing the innovation front on how to use Bitcoin mining as an integral part of like a small energy grid, how to optimize energy production, energy distribution. And the closed source nature of these miners makes it almost impossible. So the things we have to do to achieve the results that we are is bad for the machines. They end up breaking. Like, we have all of these frustration and challenges. And so, like, again, we were fortunate we had a relationship with Block, but when they were starting that design, it's like, what do you guys need? And it was this, like, we need this ability to actually communicate and control the machines, because there's, we've talked for years about all of these great benefits of Bitcoin mining being integrated to the grid. But in the closed source world, we're very limited to what we can actually achieve. Whereas if you think about the innovations that will come downstream of like a production level open source hardware, software miner, it's super exciting. Like, the things that we're going to be able to do with Bitcoin mining, 2 years from now or 5 years from now, absolutely pale in comparison to the horrible world we have to live in today with these Chinese assholes. That was probably wrong.
And what Gridless is pioneering on microgrids is completely transferable to large-scale grid balancing tools that you would be using in ERCOT or CAISO or NISO, any of these large balancing authorities that are controlling the grids that we take for granted today. And most miners, because energy is 95% of your costs and your inputs, you must control it to the absolute, like, that is your critical factor. Almost every miner has some type of proprietary, closed source, custom built software. Imagine a future where you have an open source software such as Protofleet, and then that intellectual capital can be going towards improving Bitcoin mining as a balancing tool instead of just like protect what's mine. Like, we're not competing against each other. Like, Bitcoin mining is a pioneering species. There's so much energy, there's so much wasted energy out there in the world. Like, we need to be proliferating everywhere, not competing against each other.
Gentlemen, this has been a massive pleasure. For Scott, Brad, and Philip, could we get a huge round of applause for our panelists? Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thanks.